The morning mist hung low over the Thames as London awakened to what appeared to be just another ordinary Tuesday. Street cleaners pushed their carts along the empty pavements while early commuters hurried past the towering gates of Buckingham Palace. The iconic red-coated guards stood motionless at their posts, their tall black bearskin hats making them appear more like statues than living, breathing men. Guardsman James Mitchell had been standing at his post for nearly 2 hours. At 24 years old, he represented the finest tradition of the Queen's Guard, having earned his position through months of grueling training and unwavering dedication to duty. His polished boots reflected the early morning light, and his red tunic bore not a single wrinkle. Every button gleamed, every piece of equipment sat exactly where regulations demanded it should be. The rifle in his hands was not merely ceremonial, though tourists often assumed otherwise. The SA-80 assault rifle was fully functional, loaded, and ready for use if circumstances demanded it. James had trained extensively with the weapon, spending countless hours on firing ranges and in tactical scenarios. The British Army did not take chances with royal security, regardless of how peaceful the surroundings might appear. Behind the palace gates, the daily routine was already well underway. Kitchen staff prepared breakfast for the royal household, while housekeeping teams ensured every room met the exacting standards expected in a royal residence. Security personnel monitored dozens of cameras, their eyes constantly scanning for anything unusual or threatening. The coordination between visible guards like James and the plainclothes protection officers was seamless, a carefully choreographed dance of security that had been refined over decades. James remained focused on his duties, though his mind occasionally wandered to his family back in Yorkshire. His parents had been so proud when he joined the Queen's Guard, finally, seeing their son achieve something they could boast about to neighbors. His girlfriend Sarah had been less enthusiastic about the posting, knowing it meant long periods of separation and the constant stress of knowing her boyfriend stood as a target for anyone wanting to make a statement against the monarchy. The tourists began arriving in small groups as the morning progressed. Japanese families posed for photographs, American college students snapped selfies, and British schoolchildren pressed their faces against the iron railings. James had learned to ignore the constant chatter and camera clicks, maintaining his stoic expression despite the barrage of questions shouted in his direction. 3 blocks away, in a dingy bedsit above a Pakistani restaurant, 32-year-old Marcus Thompson stared at his reflection in a cracked mirror. The man looking back bore little resemblance to the promising university student he had once been. Years of unemployment, failed relationships, and mounting debt had carved deep lines into his face. His clothes were wrinkled and stained, having been worn for days without washing. Marcus had not always been this way. He held a degree in computer science from a respectable university and had once harbored dreams of working for a major tech company. But the economic downturn had hit him hard just as he graduated, and every job application seemed to disappear into a void of automated rejection emails. The savings his parents had scraped together to support his education had long since evaporated. The final straw had come 3 days earlier when his landlord served him with an eviction notice. The small room that served as his entire world would be taken from him by the end of the week unless he could produce rent money he simply did not have. His benefits had been cut due to missing an appointment he had never been told about, and his appeals had been buried in government bureaucracy. Marcus had spent the previous night walking the streets of London, his mind churning with desperation and rage. Every expensive car that passed, every well-dressed person hurrying to their important job, served as a reminder of how far he had fallen. The contrast between his circumstances and the wealth displayed throughout the capital felt like salt in an open wound. As dawn broke, he found himself standing outside Buckingham Palace, staring at the guards and the grandeur they protected. Here was the ultimate symbol of British privilege and power, defended by men not much younger than himself who had found purpose and stability that seemed forever beyond his reach. The unfairness of it all consumed him as he watched tourists take photographs of guards who represented everything he could never have. Back at his post, James noticed a man in shabby clothes lingering near the gates longer than most visitors. The individual appeared agitated, pacing back and forth while muttering to himself. James made a mental note of the person's appearance but did not deviate from his position. The protection officers monitoring the area would have already identified the potential concern and would be tracking the man's movements. Inside the Palace Security Center, Sergeant Williams observed multiple camera feeds while coordinating with officers positioned throughout the area. The man outside had indeed been flagged as behaving unusually, but his actions had not yet crossed the threshold that would warrant intervention. Hundreds of people visited the palace daily, and many displayed odd behavior without posing any genuine threat. Marcus felt the weight of his situation crushing down on him as he stood outside the palace gates. Every solution he considered led to dead ends. He had no family willing to help, no friends with resources to spare, and no prospects for legitimate employment. The system seemed designed to keep people like him trapped in an endless cycle of desperation and despair. His eyes fixed on the rifle carried by the nearest guard. In his increasingly unstable mental state, Marcus began to formulate a plan that seemed to offer a way out of his circumstances. If he could not find success through conventional means, perhaps he could gain the attention and notoriety that might translate into some form of opportunity. The logic was flawed and desperate, but, to a man with nothing left to lose, it began to seem reasonable. James completed another hour of his duty rotation, maintaining perfect posture despite the physical strain. His training had prepared him for the mental challenges of remaining alert while appearing relaxed, of projecting calm authority while staying ready for instant action. The weight of his rifle had become as natural as the weight of his own arms. The morning crowd grew larger as tour groups arrived and office workers cut through the area on their way to jobs in nearby government buildings. James observed each face without appearing to do so, a skill developed through months of practice. Most people looked at him with curiosity or admiration, taking photos before moving on to other attractions. Marcus continued his agitated pacing, his behavior becoming increasingly erratic as his internal crisis deepened. Other visitors began to give him a wider berth, sensing something unstable about his demeanor. Security personnel maintained their watch but still assessed his threat level as manageable through existing protocols. The collision course was set, though neither James nor Marcus fully understood what the next few hours would bring. James focused on his duty, representing centuries of British military tradition and royal protection. Marcus spiraled deeper into desperation, convinced that dramatic action was his only remaining option. The morning sun climbed higher over London, casting long shadows across the palace forecourt. Tour guides led groups of visitors through their scheduled routines, pointing out architectural details and sharing historical anecdotes. Street vendors set up their carts selling souvenirs and refreshments. The city maintained its normal rhythm, unaware that events were already in motion that would dominate international headlines within hours. James shifted slightly to relieve pressure on his feet, a movement so subtle that most observers would not notice. His training had taught him techniques for maintaining circulation and alertness during long periods of stationary duty. Every aspect of his role had been studied and refined by generations of guards who had stood at these same posts. Marcus retreated to a nearby cafe, ordering tea he could barely afford while trying to organize his thoughts. The elderly woman behind the counter looked at him with a mixture of pity and concern, recognizing the signs of someone struggling with circumstances beyond their control. She added extra sugar to his cup without being asked, a small kindness that Marcus barely acknowledged. The plan forming in Marcus's mind became clearer as he sat in the cramped cafe. He would approach the guard during a busy period when maximum numbers of witnesses and cameras would record whatever happened. The exact details remained fuzzy, but he convinced himself that any action would be better than continuing to fade into invisibility while his life fell apart around him. James began the final hour of his morning shift, knowing he would soon be relieved by another guard in the precisely timed rotation that ensured constant protection. His replacement would arrive exactly on schedule, exchange the briefest of acknowledgments, and assume responsibility for the post. The transition would be seamless, maintaining the unbroken chain of royal protection that stretched back centuries. The stage was set for an encounter that would test every aspect of James's training and forever alter the lives of everyone involved. Neither man could predict how the next few hours would unfold, but both were moving inexorably toward a moment that would expose the vulnerabilities hidden beneath the pageantry and tradition of royal security. As Marcus finished his tea and prepared to return to the palace, and James maintained his vigilant watch over the crowds gathering outside the gates, London continued its ancient rhythm, unaware that it was about to witness an event that would challenge everything people believed about the balance between public access and royal protection. The morning that had begun so ordinarily was about to become anything but ordinary. The lunch hour brought larger crowds to Buckingham Palace as office workers joined the constant stream of tourists gathering around the famous gates. James Mitchell had been relieved from his morning post and assigned to afternoon duty at a different position, one that placed him closer to the main gathering area where visitors pressed against the railings for photographs and glimpses of royal activity. Marcus Thompson had spent the intervening hours walking aimlessly through central London, his agitation building with each passing minute. He had returned twice to his bedsit, each time staring at the eviction notice pinned to his door. The reality of becoming homeless within days had crystallized his desperate thinking into something approaching a plan, though the details remained chaotic and poorly thought through. At precisely 2:30 in the afternoon, Marcus positioned himself among a group of tourists photographing the guards. His appearance drew uncomfortable glances from well-dressed visitors, but the diverse nature of London crowds meant his presence was not immediately alarming to security personnel. He had washed his face in a public restroom and attempted to smooth his wrinkled clothing, though the effort had done little to disguise his desperate circumstances. James stood at attention approximately 15 feet from the palace railings, his position chosen to provide optimal visibility of both the crowds and potential approach routes to the palace itself. His rifle was held in the regulation position, ready for immediate use but not obviously threatening to the peaceful gathering of sightseers surrounding him. The afternoon shift supervisor, Sergeant Patricia Davies, monitored the scene from the security center while coordinating with plainclothes protection officers positioned throughout the crowd. The computer screens displayed feeds from dozens of cameras, providing comprehensive coverage of every angle around the palace perimeter. Standard protocols called for continuous assessment of crowd behavior and immediate response to any suspicious activity. Marcus felt his heart racing as he studied the guard's position and equipment. The rifle appeared heavy and substantial, clearly not merely decorative as he had assumed during his morning observations. The guard's stance suggested extensive military training, and his eyes moved constantly despite his apparently stationary position. This would not be as simple as Marcus had imagined during his desperate planning. A tour group of American teenagers clustered nearby, their guide explaining the history and traditions of the Queen's Guard. Their excited chatter and constant photography created the kind of distraction Marcus had hoped for, providing cover for his approach while ensuring maximum witness presence for whatever was about to unfold. James noticed the shabby man from the morning had returned and was displaying increasingly agitated behavior. The individual's movements were becoming more purposeful, his attention focused intensely on the guards rather than the palace itself. James made eye contact with a plainclothes protection officer who nodded almost imperceptibly, confirming that the man was under observation. The moment arrived with shocking suddenness. Marcus pushed through the crowd of tourists, his desperation overriding any remaining caution or rational thought. He lunged directly toward James, his hands reaching for the rifle with wild, uncontrolled movements. His actions were so sudden and unexpected that several nearby visitors initially assumed they were witnessing some form of planned demonstration or publicity stunt. James's training kicked in instantly. Years of preparation for exactly this type of scenario compressed into a few seconds of decisive action. He pulled the rifle back and away from Marcus's grasping hands while simultaneously stepping to the side to create distance and a better defensive position. The movement was smooth and controlled, designed to protect the weapon while avoiding unnecessary harm to the attacker. Marcus's momentum carried him forward as James evaded his initial grab, causing him to stumble and nearly fall among the shocked tourists. His desperation made him persistent, and he immediately turned to make another attempt at seizing the rifle. This time his movements were even more erratic, his hands clawing frantically at the weapon while shouting incoherently about fairness and opportunity. The crowd's reaction was immediate and chaotic. Tourists screamed and scattered in all directions, parents grabbing children and running for cover behind cars and buildings. Camera phones appeared as people recorded the unfolding drama, though many were too shocked or frightened to think about documentation. The peaceful afternoon scene transformed into pandemonium within seconds. James maintained control of his weapon while calling for backup through his communication system. His voice remained calm and professional despite the extraordinary circumstances, his training allowing him to think clearly while under direct physical attack. He continued to maneuver away from Marcus while keeping the rifle secure and ready for use if the situation escalated further. Plainclothes protection officers converged on the scene from multiple directions, their positions carefully coordinated to surround Marcus without endangering civilians or creating crossfire situations. These officers had been monitoring the crowd throughout the afternoon, and their response was swift and professional despite the unexpected nature of the attack. Marcus seemed oblivious to the approaching security personnel, his entire focus concentrated on trying to wrestle the rifle away from James. His movements became increasingly frantic as his initial attempts failed, and his shouting grew louder and more incoherent. The desperation that had driven him to this point now manifested as complete disregard for consequences or personal safety. The first protection officer reached Marcus just as he made his third attempt to grab the weapon. The officer's approach was textbook perfect, using minimal force techniques designed to subdue without causing serious injury. Marcus was brought to the ground quickly and, efficiently, his hands secured behind his back before he could mount any significant resistance. James immediately stepped back and assessed the situation, confirming that his weapon was secure and that no other threats were present in the immediate area. His heart was racing from the adrenaline, but his external appearance remained calm and controlled. The incident had lasted less than 90 seconds from beginning to end, though it felt much longer to everyone involved. Additional security personnel arrived within minutes, establishing a perimeter around the arrest site while paramedics checked Marcus for injuries sustained during his apprehension. The area was quickly cleared of tourists and sealed off as a potential crime scene, though the investigation would need to account for the hundreds of witnesses and countless photographs taken during the incident. Marcus lay on the ground in handcuffs, his desperate gamble having failed completely. The adrenaline that had carried him through the attack was fading, replaced by the crushing realization of what he had just done. The consequences he had not considered during his planning were now inevitable and severe. His attempt to escape his circumstances had only made them infinitely worse. Sergeant Davies coordinated the response from the security center, ensuring that all protocols were followed while managing the media attention that was already beginning to build. News vans would arrive within the hour, and international coverage would follow shortly thereafter. The incident would dominate headlines across the globe, though the full story would take days to emerge. James remained at his post while investigators documented the scene and took preliminary statements. His actions had been exemplary, demonstrating exactly the kind of professional response the Queen's Guard was trained to provide. His rifle had never been in serious danger of being taken, thanks to his quick thinking and superior preparation. The tourists who had witnessed the attack were questioned by police officers and asked to provide any photographs or video they had captured. Many were still visibly shaken by the experience, having come to London for a peaceful sightseeing trip only to find themselves in the middle of an international security incident. Marcus was eventually loaded into a police van for transport to a secure facility where he would undergo psychological evaluation and formal questioning. His desperate attempt to change his circumstances had succeeded only in destroying what little remained of his future prospects. The attention he had sought would come at a price far higher than he had anticipated. As the immediate crisis subsided, James reflected on how quickly the situation had developed and escalated. His training had prepared him for such possibilities, but experiencing an actual attack was different from any simulation or exercise. The weight of responsibility for protecting both his weapon and the crowd of innocent bystanders had been enormous. The afternoon sun continued to shine on Buckingham Palace as normal operations gradually resumed. Fresh guards took their positions while investigators continued their work documenting every aspect of the incident. The ancient institution of royal protection had faced a modern challenge and responded effectively, though questions would be raised about how such an attack could have come so close to success. Media representatives began arriving at the scene, eager to interview witnesses and capture footage of the location where the dramatic events had unfolded. The story would spread rapidly across social media platforms, with eyewitness accounts and amateur video providing multiple perspectives on the same shocking incident. James knew his name would soon be known around the world as details of the story emerged. The quiet anonymity that was supposed to characterize his service as a Queen's Guard had been shattered by circumstances beyond his control. He would become a symbol of professional duty and preparedness, though the attention was not something he had ever wanted or expected. The incident was over, but its consequences were only beginning to unfold. Lives had been forever changed by 90 seconds of chaos outside Buckingham Palace, and the ripple effects would continue expanding in ways that none of the participants could yet fully comprehend. London had witnessed something unprecedented, and the world was about to take notice. Within 30 minutes of Marcus Thompson's arrest, Scotland Yard's Counter-Terrorism Command had taken control of the investigation. The attempt to seize a Royal Guard's weapon triggered automatic protocols that treated the incident as a potential terrorist attack until proven otherwise. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Williams arrived on scene as media vans lined the streets surrounding Buckingham Palace. The palace grounds had been transformed into a massive crime scene, with forensic teams documenting every detail of the attack. Yellow tape cordoned off the area where Marcus had lunged for James Mitchell's rifle, while photographers captured evidence from dozens of different angles. The investigation would need to determine whether this was an isolated incident by a disturbed individual or part of a larger threat against royal security. James found himself at the center of an intensive debriefing process that would continue for hours. His account of the incident was recorded multiple times by different investigators, each seeking to understand exactly how events had unfolded and whether security protocols had been followed correctly. His actions during the attack would be scrutinized by experts looking for lessons that could improve future responses. Marcus was transported to a secure facility in East London where he underwent immediate psychological evaluation. Dr. Amanda Price, a forensic psychiatrist with extensive experience in terrorism cases, was called in to assess his mental state and determine whether he posed an ongoing threat to public safety. Her evaluation would play a crucial role in determining how he would be charged and prosecuted. The media response was immediate and overwhelming. News channels interrupted regular programming to report on the security breach at Buckingham Palace, though initial reports contained numerous inaccuracies as journalists scrambled to piece together what had happened. Social media platforms exploded with eyewitness accounts, amateur video footage, and wild speculation about the attackers' motives. International news organizations dispatched teams to London within hours of the incident. The attack on royal security was front-page news across Europe, dominated cable television coverage in America, and sparked diplomatic discussions about security cooperation between allied nations. The British royal family remained one of the world's most recognizable institutions, making any threat against them a matter of global interest. Detective Chief Inspector Williams established an incident room at Scotland Yard where investigators began the painstaking process of building a complete picture of both the attack itself and the background of everyone involved. Marcus's entire life history would be examined for signs of radicalization, mental illness, or connections to extremist groups that might have influenced his actions. James's military record was also reviewed as part of standard procedure, though investigators quickly confirmed his exemplary service history and complete reliability. His response during the attack had been textbook perfect, demonstrating the effectiveness of Queen's Guard training and the appropriateness of current security protocols around armed sentries. The forensic examination of the scene revealed the chaotic nature of Marcus's attack and the professional competence of the security response. Bloodstains on the pavement showed where Marcus had scraped his knees during his apprehension, while scuff marks indicated the precise movements of both attacker and defender during their brief struggle. Marcus remained largely unresponsive during his initial questioning, appearing to be in shock over what he had done. His legal representation arrived within hours, though he showed little interest in discussing strategy or mounting any kind of defense. The reality of his situation seemed to have overwhelmed his ability to think clearly about his future. Dr. Price's preliminary assessment suggested that Marcus was suffering from severe depression and anxiety related to his financial difficulties, but showed no signs of psychosis or delusional thinking that would support an insanity defense. His attack appeared to have been driven by desperation rather than mental illness, though a complete evaluation would require several more days. The investigation team discovered Marcus's eviction notice and began interviewing his landlord, neighbors, and former associates to understand the circumstances that had led to his desperate act. A picture emerged of a man whose life had spiraled out of control following a series of setbacks, but who had no history of violence or political extremism. James was finally released from questioning late that evening, though he would be required to remain available for follow-up interviews as the investigation continued. The stress of the day was evident in his face despite his attempts to maintain his usual composed demeanor. His girlfriend Sarah had been notified of the incident and was waiting to take him home. The palace issued a carefully worded statement acknowledging the incident while praising the professional response of security personnel. The statement emphasized that at no point had the royal family been in danger, and that existing security measures had proven effective in preventing any actual breach of palace defenses. Media coverage intensified throughout the evening as television networks devoted extensive time to analyzing the incident and its implications for royal security. Experts debated whether the attack revealed weaknesses in current protocols or demonstrated their effectiveness. The balance between public access to royal ceremonies and adequate protection became a major topic of discussion. International security agencies contacted their British counterparts to share intelligence about potential threats and offer assistance with the investigation. The attack had occurred during a period of heightened global terrorism concerns, making any incident involving weapons and royal protection a matter of international security interest. The tourism industry expressed immediate concern about the potential impact on visitor numbers to London. Buckingham Palace was one of the city's most popular attractions, and any perception that it was unsafe could have significant economic consequences. Hotel bookings and tour reservations would be monitored closely in the coming days. Marcus's former university classmates were tracked down and interviewed as investigators sought to understand his political views and social connections. The picture that emerged was of an intelligent but increasingly isolated individual whose radical views appeared to be limited to frustration with his personal circumstances rather than any broader ideological agenda. The forensic analysis of Marcus's computer and phone revealed extensive research into unemployment benefits, job search websites, and debt advice services, but no evidence of contact with extremist groups or consumption of radical propaganda. His internet history suggested a man desperately seeking legitimate solutions to his problems rather than planning any kind of attack. James's family in Yorkshire found themselves suddenly thrust into the media spotlight as reporters attempted to interview anyone connected to the hero guard who had thwarted the attack. His parents struggled to understand how their son's routine duty had turned into an international news story, while expressing pride in his professional response under pressure. The Queen's Guard Regiment began reviewing their training protocols to ensure that lessons from the incident could be incorporated into future preparation. While James's response had been exemplary, military leaders wanted to understand whether any improvements could be made to equipment, procedures, or communication systems. Security camera footage from multiple angles was assembled into a comprehensive timeline showing exactly how events had unfolded. The video evidence confirmed witness accounts and demonstrated the speed with which both the attack and the security response had occurred. The footage would be crucial evidence in any eventual trial. Marcus's mental health history was examined through medical records and interviews with healthcare providers. A pattern emerged of increasing depression and anxiety following his graduation and subsequent unemployment, but no previous episodes of violence or threats against public figures. His attack appeared to represent a complete break from his normal behavior patterns. The investigation expanded to include analysis of social media posts and online communications that might have influenced Marcus's decision to target royal security. Researchers found evidence of his growing frustration with government policies and social inequality, but no direct threats or expressions of intent to commit violence. James participated in additional interviews designed to help investigators understand the psychology of the attack from the victim's perspective. His insights into Marcus's behavior during the incident provided valuable information about the attacker's state of mind and level of planning or preparation. Public opinion polls conducted in the days following the incident showed strong support for the Queen's Guard and existing security measures, though there was significant debate about whether changes were needed to prevent similar attacks. The balance between maintaining traditional pageantry and ensuring adequate protection proved to be a complex issue with no easy solutions. The investigation revealed that Marcus had visited the palace area multiple times in the days leading up to his attack, apparently conducting surveillance of guard positions and routines. Security footage showed him loitering near the gates and observing shift changes, suggesting a level of premeditation that contradicted initial assumptions about spontaneous desperation driving his actions. As the first phase of the investigation concluded, a clear picture had emerged of an isolated incident by a deeply troubled individual rather than any broader threat to royal security. However, the case raised important questions about the vulnerability of armed guards to sudden attack and the adequacy of current protective measures around one of Britain's most important symbolic institutions. The legal proceedings against Marcus Thompson began 3 days after his arrest when he appeared before Westminster Magistrates' Court for his initial hearing. The courtroom was packed with journalists and members of the public, while outside, protesters held signs both supporting and condemning the man who had attacked royal security. The case had already become a symbol of broader social tensions about inequality and the role of the monarchy in modern Britain. Marcus's legal team, headed by prominent defense barrister Helena Crawford, faced the difficult task of representing a client whose actions had been witnessed by hundreds of people and recorded on multiple cameras. Their strategy would focus on Marcus's mental state and the desperate circumstances that had driven him to such an extreme act, while acknowledging the seriousness of his crimes. The prosecution, led by Crown Prosecutor David Stirling, outlined charges that included attempted theft of a firearm, assault on a police officer, threatening behavior, and breach of public order. Additional charges related to terrorism prevention laws were considered but ultimately dismissed when intelligence services confirmed no evidence of political motivation or connections to extremist groups. Judge Margaret Foster presided over the preliminary hearing with careful attention to the intense public interest surrounding the case. Media coverage had been extensive and often sensationalized, making it crucial to ensure that legal proceedings remained focused on facts rather than public opinion. She ordered strict limits on courtroom photography and recording to preserve the dignity of the judicial process. Marcus appeared confused and disoriented during his first court appearance, requiring frequent consultation with his legal team to understand the charges against him. His disheveled appearance and obvious distress generated sympathy from some observers, while others viewed him as a dangerous individual who had threatened one of Britain's most cherished institutions. Dr. Amanda Price's psychiatric evaluation was presented to the court as evidence of Marcus's mental state at the time of the attack. Her report described severe depression and anxiety disorder exacerbated by financial stress and social isolation, but concluded that he had been aware of his actions and capable of understanding right from wrong during the incident. The defense argued that Marcus's attack had been a cry for help rather than a genuine attempt to steal a weapon or harm anyone. They pointed to his lack of any escape plan, his obvious distress following his arrest, and his complete cooperation with investigators as evidence that he had not intended to commit a serious crime but had simply reached a breaking point in his personal struggles. James Mitchell was called to testify about his experience during the attack, providing a detailed account of Marcus's behavior and apparent mental state. His testimony was calm and professional, focusing on factual observations rather than personal opinions about the attacker's motivations. The courtroom listened in rapt attention as he described the speed and desperation of Marcus's assault on his weapon. The prosecution emphasized the serious nature of attacking an armed guard at one of the world's most high-profile locations, arguing that Marcus's personal circumstances could not excuse behavior that threatened public safety and national security. They pointed out that his actions had terrorized innocent tourists and diverted significant security resources from their normal duties. Marcus's former employer testified about his work history and the circumstances surrounding his job loss. The economic downturn had forced significant layoffs, and Marcus had been among the most recent hires to be dismissed. His supervisor described him as a competent but increasingly withdrawn employee who had shown signs of stress in his final months of employment. Character witnesses painted a picture of a man whose life had been derailed by circumstances largely beyond his control. Former classmates described his academic achievements and early career ambitions, while neighbors testified about his quiet, non-confrontational nature prior to his recent troubles. The contrast between Marcus's past potential and present circumstances was stark and compelling. The court heard extensive testimony about the security implications of the attack and the measures taken to prevent similar incidents in the future. Senior police officials described the investigation process and the determination that Marcus had acted alone without any broader conspiracy or support network. Helena Crawford argued passionately for leniency, emphasizing her client's lack of criminal history and the mental health issues that had contributed to his desperate act. She described the attack as completely out of character for a man who had never shown any signs of violence or anti-establishment sentiment until his personal crisis reached its peak. The prosecution countered by highlighting the potential consequences if Marcus's attack had succeeded in disarming a royal guard. They presented expert testimony about the damage that could have been caused by a stolen military weapon in the hands of an unstable individual, regardless of his original intentions or mental state. Public opinion remained divided throughout the trial proceedings. Mental health advocates pointed to Marcus's case as an example of society's failure to support vulnerable individuals facing economic hardship. Others argued that personal struggles could never justify attacking symbols of national heritage and security. Marcus's family members testified about their attempts to help him during his period of unemployment and depression. His parents had offered what financial assistance they could afford, while his sister had tried repeatedly to convince him to seek professional help for his mental health issues. Their testimony revealed a support network that had been insufficient to prevent his breakdown. The defense presented expert testimony from economists and social workers about the broader context of unemployment and social inequality that had shaped Marcus's desperation. They argued that his attack was symptomatic of larger societal problems that needed to be addressed through policy changes rather than simply punishing individuals who reached their breaking point. James Mitchell's commanding officers testified about the training and protocols that had enabled him to respond effectively to the attack. Their testimony highlighted the professionalism of the Queen's Guard while also revealing the constant threat assessment that armed personnel must maintain even during ceremonial duties. The court examined security camera footage frame by frame, analyzing every aspect of the 90-second encounter between Marcus and James. The video evidence clearly showed Marcus's aggressive actions and James's measured response, supporting the prosecution's argument that the guard had acted with remarkable restraint under extreme pressure. Marcus's landlord testified about the eviction proceedings that had been the final trigger for his desperate act. The testimony revealed a pattern of missed rent payments and increasingly erratic behavior that had preceded the attack by several weeks. The landlord expressed regret about the situation while maintaining that he had followed proper legal procedures. Mental health experts debated whether Marcus's actions constituted a mental health crisis that should be treated primarily through medical intervention rather than criminal punishment. The discussion highlighted ongoing questions about the relationship between mental illness, social circumstances, and criminal responsibility in modern legal systems. The prosecution's closing arguments emphasized the rule of law and the need to maintain respect for institutions that represented stability and tradition in British society. They argued that allowing personal circumstances to excuse serious crimes would undermine the foundation of civil order and encourage others to resort to violence when facing difficulties. Helena Crawford's defense summary painted Marcus as a victim of societal failures who had acted out of desperation rather than malice. She argued for a sentence that would provide him with the mental health treatment and support he needed while acknowledging the seriousness of his actions and their impact on others. The judge's decision would need to balance competing considerations of justice, public safety, mental health, and social responsibility. The case had become a test of how the legal system would respond to crimes committed by individuals whose circumstances had driven them to extreme acts without clear criminal intent. As the trial phase concluded, both sides prepared for what would likely be extensive appeals regardless of the verdict. The case had attracted attention from legal scholars, mental health professionals, and social policy experts who saw it as potentially setting important precedents for similar future cases. The courtroom drama had provided a platform for broader discussions about inequality, mental health resources, and the role of traditional institutions in modern society. Marcus Thompson's desperate 90 seconds outside Buckingham Palace had sparked conversations that would continue long after his legal fate was determined. 6 months after the incident at Buckingham Palace, the ripple effects continue to spread through British society and beyond. Judge Margaret Foster had sentenced Marcus Thompson to 18 months in prison, followed by mandatory mental health treatment and community service. The sentence attempted to balance punishment for his crimes with recognition of the mental health issues that had contributed to his desperate act. Marcus began serving his sentence at HMP Pentonville, where he was placed in a specialized unit for inmates with mental health conditions. The prison environment was a shocking contrast to his previous life, but it also provided structure and routine that had been missing during his downward spiral. Prison counselors worked with him to address the depression and anxiety that had driven him to attack the Royal Guard. James Mitchell found that his life had been permanently altered by those 90 seconds of chaos outside the palace gates. He had become an international symbol of professional duty and calm under pressure, receiving commendations from military leadership and messages of support from around the world. However, the constant media attention had made it impossible for him to return to normal anonymity. The Queen's Guard underwent the most comprehensive review of security protocols in decades following the incident. Military analysts studied every aspect of the attack and response, identifying potential improvements while preserving the traditional pageantry that made the Guard such an important tourist attraction. New communication systems were installed to enable faster coordination during emergencies. Additional plainclothes security personnel were positioned around the palace perimeter, though their presence was kept as discreet as possible to maintain the appearance of public accessibility. The balance between openness and security remained delicate, requiring constant adjustment as threat assessments evolved and public expectations changed. Dr. Amanda Price published a detailed study of Marcus's case that became required reading for forensic psychiatrists and law enforcement professionals. Her analysis of the intersection between mental health, social circumstances, and criminal behavior provided valuable insights for preventing similar incidents in the future. The tourism industry initially feared significant damage from the security breach, but visitor numbers to Buckingham Palace actually increased in the months following the incident. Many tourists were drawn by curiosity about the location where the dramatic events had unfolded, while others wanted to show support for the royal family and British institutions. Marcus's case became a rallying point for mental health advocates who argued for increased funding and improved access to psychological services. Parliamentary committees examined the gaps in social support systems that had allowed his situation to deteriorate to such an extreme point without intervention from healthcare or social services. Helena Crawford, Marcus's defense barrister, used her experience with the case to campaign for legal reforms addressing the treatment of defendants with mental health issues. She argued that the criminal justice system needed better mechanisms for identifying and addressing psychological factors that contributed to criminal behavior. James received a promotion and was assigned to a specialized royal protection unit where his experience and proven reliability made him particularly valuable. His new role involved less public exposure but greater responsibility for analyzing threats and coordinating responses to potential security incidents. The international security community studied the Buckingham Palace incident as a case study in lone actor terrorism prevention and response. Intelligence agencies from allied nations incorporated lessons learned from the attack into their own protocols for protecting high-value targets and symbolic locations. Marcus's family struggled with the public attention surrounding his case and its aftermath. His parents received both supportive messages from people who sympathized with their son's struggles and angry criticism from those who viewed him as a threat to cherished institutions. The experience highlighted the collateral damage that high-profile crimes inflict on innocent family members. Prison psychologists worked intensively with Marcus to help him understand the factors that had led to his attack and develop coping strategies for managing stress and depression. The controlled environment of incarceration provided stability that had been missing from his life, though the loss of freedom remained a constant source of distress. Parliamentary debates about royal security funding intensified following the incident, with some members arguing for increased budgets while others questioned whether traditional ceremonial guards remained appropriate in an age of modern terrorist threats. The discussions revealed deep divisions about the role of monarchy in contemporary British society. Academic researchers began long-term studies of the incident's impact on public perception of royal security and institutional legitimacy. Polling data showed that while most citizens supported the royal family and the Queen's Guard, there was growing awareness of the vulnerabilities inherent in maintaining public accessibility to royal ceremonies and locations. James's girlfriend Sarah found it difficult to adjust to the fame and scrutiny that came with dating someone who had become a national hero. Their relationship faced new pressures as media attention continued and security concerns required changes to their normal routines and social activities. Marcus participated in educational programs within prison designed to help him develop job skills and address the employment issues that had contributed to his original desperation. Computer training courses allowed him to update his technical knowledge, while counseling sessions helped him process the traumatic events that had led to his incarceration. The incident prompted reviews of security procedures at other royal residences and ceremonial locations throughout the United Kingdom. Windsor Castle, Holyrood House, and other significant sites implemented enhanced measures while attempting to preserve their accessibility to the public. Mental health professionals noted an increase in requests for treatment from individuals experiencing financial stress and social isolation similar to Marcus's circumstances. His case had highlighted the potential for desperate individuals to resort to extreme measures when conventional support systems failed to address their needs. International media coverage of the incident and its aftermath continued to generate discussion about the balance between traditional ceremony and modern security requirements. Royal families in other countries examined their own protective measures in light of the vulnerabilities revealed by Marcus's successful approach to an armed guard. James began speaking at military training facilities about his experience, helping to prepare future guards for similar incidents while emphasizing the importance of maintaining professional demeanor under extreme stress. His first-hand account became an invaluable resource for understanding the psychology of both attackers and defenders in high-pressure situations. Marcus's prison letters to his family revealed a gradual improvement in his mental state as medication and therapy began to address his underlying depression. He expressed deep remorse for his actions while struggling to understand how his desperation had led him to such an extreme choice. The economic impact of enhanced security measures created ongoing budget pressures for the organizations responsible for royal protection. New personnel, equipment, and training requirements represented significant ongoing costs that had to be balanced against other government spending priorities. Public discussions about social inequality and mental health support gained momentum from Marcus's case, with advocacy groups using his story to illustrate the need for comprehensive reforms to prevent similar desperate acts. His attack had become a symbol of broader societal failures to support vulnerable individuals. James found that his experience had given him unique insights into human behavior under stress, leading to his involvement in training programs for other security professionals. His calm response during the attack was studied and emulated by personnel responsible for protecting government officials and other high-value targets. The long-term consequences of those 90 seconds outside Buckingham Palace continued to unfold in ways that none of the participants could have anticipated. A desperate man's attempt to change his circumstances had indeed transformed multiple lives, but not in any way he had intended or desired. As Marcus approached his eventual release date, prison officials prepared comprehensive support plans designed to prevent his reintegration into society from repeating the isolation and desperation that had led to his original offense. The case had become a test of whether the criminal justice system could effectively rehabilitate offenders whose crimes stemmed from social and psychological factors rather than inherent criminality. The incident had exposed fundamental tensions between accessibility and security, tradition and modernization, individual responsibility and social support that would continue to challenge policymakers and security professionals for years to come. Marcus Thompson and James Mitchell had become unwilling symbols of these larger struggles, their brief encounter representing broader questions about the kind of society Britain wanted to be in the 21st century.